Hello, I am Alexia Lewis, RD. I am a culinary nutritionist and the current president of the First Coast Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, and this video is for them today. The fall is a wonderful time to enjoy apples, and we're going to make a twist on that old favorite, the bloomin' onion, but we're going to make a bloomin' apple instead. Right here you can see everything you will need for this recipe. So to start with, I just preheated my oven to 375. I have washed my hands, I have washed the apples, and I've got everything I need ready to go. So the very first thing we're going to do is prepare the apples. And to do that, I'm going to start with this big one right here. What we're going to do is slice off the top and then scoop out the core. So if you don't know, you can eat an apple core. I mean, nothing horrible will happen, but it's probably not the best thing, and definitely don't give it to your dogs because dogs cannot eat apples. The apple seeds are not good for dogs. So I have just sliced off the top of my apple, not very well, as you can see, and I'm going to use a melon baller to scoop out the core. You could also use a paring knife, but for me, I feel like this will just be a little bit easier. So I'm just going to work my way around the core and scoop it out. Oh, and there goes some of it. And as you can see, as you go into the apple, you're going to just have to keep chipping away until you get the core out. And a melon baller really is a good choice for this because, as you can see, you just keep scooping in and you'll find where your core and the seeds are. So these are actually Honey Crisp apples, which are one of the apples that is better for baking, which is why I've chosen them for this recipe. They tend to hold their shape a little more and retain some of that crispness as well. I will tell you, it's not my prettiest work, but as you can see, we are starting to see the bottom of the apple, so that is nice and hollowed out. So I'm going to repeat that with the other apple before we move on. Got to get better at slicing. I leave that little stem in there every time. And hopefully this one won't be as much trouble because it's a smaller apple. So I did not pick these apples. These were a grocery delivery apple selection for me. I probably would have chosen a smaller apple because this is a dessert and it does have some sugar and some butter because it's a dessert, right? It's got to be good. So just to keep it more on the healthy side, I would probably get a smaller portion to enjoy, just so I don't overload on the sugar and the butter all at one time. But that's just my personal preference. We all have different health concerns, so we're all going to approach that a little bit differently, and that's okay. All right, and so you can see that one cored out quite nicely. The next thing we're going to do is take a paring knife and make some circular cuts. So if you think about the bloomin' onion, remember it comes apart kind of like petals, and so we're going to try to create that with the apple. Now I will be honest with you, I'm sorry, I don't mean to point a knife at you. I will be honest with you and let you know that this is my first attempt at this recipe, so we'll see how it goes together. And so I'm going to do one of the apples just by scoring the top to let some of the buttery, sugary, cinnamony goodness soak into the apple, and the other one that's bigger, I'm actually going to try to go a little deeper when I pare around the circles to see if we can replicate that kind of blooming feel. So on the first one, and I am actually going to wear a glove on this because I just want to be a little extra safe and I haven't done this before. It could be very easy, I think you could imagine, to stab right into your hand. So this one I'm just going to go in and I'm just scoring. And what this is going to do is allow, when I top this with the butter and the sugar and the cinnamon, it's going to give that topping some place to soak into, which is going to make it nice and delicious. So I'm not going too far. As you see, I can very easily get right into the middle of the core there. So just randomly scoring, making some little pockets and places for that butter to soak in. So that's one of them. Now the other one, we're going to be a little more adventurous and see if we can get down in there and really make some petals. Going to go a little bit deeper with the knife. And one thing I'm learning already is that you probably don't want to core out as much of the center as I did, because I am finding that the knife wants to go right into the center space, which would just cut a big hole. All right, so that's one circle all the way around. See if I can do another smaller one. And maybe do some on the outside, trying to go right along the skin of the apple. So definitely not an exact science here. And I think one thing, people are afraid to experiment in the kitchen, but unless you're baking, to have fun, see what happens. So that is coring. And now the next thing I'm gonna do is take my larger knife and cut it into sections, but not cut all the way through, because I don't want to slice it. I want the bottom to stay together so that it holds this all together. So I'm just going to slice most of the way through. And then I'm going to do a quarter turn and go through again. And then I'm going to divide each of those sections in half, so I end up with 8 slices. And so you can see it kind of, you can see the separation already on this bigger one on the sides where I've sliced. So that's kind of the idea with that. And then we've got 2, so let me just do the other one real quick. Smaller apple is much easier to deal with. And I'm actually going to make these slices a little bit smaller and see what happens. So this one I'm doing 8 cuts so that each section gets a little bit smaller, and I think that'll make it, well, there'll be more petals to eat, right? So it'll make your dessert last longer, and that is always a good thing. So now the apples are prepared, and I'm just going to place them on my baking dish and set these aside. And for the topping, we have, I'm following a recipe, so bear with me, 2 tablespoons. Actually, I'm doing half the recipe, so I need to half all of this. So I need 1 tablespoon of butter. And this I have kept out, so you can see it's very easy to work with. I'm not going to be too terribly exact with these measurements, because in this case, more would be better. It's for the topping. There is 1 1/4, so half, about 3/4 of a tablespoon of sugar. Now you're going to notice brands because you're in my kitchen cooking with me and things I have in my house. I do not endorse any of these brands. I don't think one is better than the other. Chances are what you see in my kitchen is what was on sale when I went to shop for it. I did in this case, however, choose Splenda Brown Sugar Blend because there's already sugar in the recipe, and I just want to be mindful of my sugar intake. You don't have to use a Splenda product. Feel free to use a stevia product, a monk fruit product, an agave product, or just brown sugar. Your sugar choice is exactly that. It's yours. And this one is mine, so that's what we're going to use. So again, I'm just roughly halving the recipe, and brown sugar makes everything better. And then we're going to do a 1/4 teaspoon of cinnamon, which I'm not even going to measure. So we're just going to call that done. I'm going to drop this into the microwave real quick for 30 seconds to let it melt, and then I'll come back and we'll finish the apples. All right, now that actually just took 15 seconds because the butter was already at room temperature. And I'm just going to stir this up a little more. So you see you have your topping. And now we come back to the apples. So first we're going to fill each apple core with 2 caramels. I have never bought caramels until I needed them for this recipe. So 2 caramels. Wow, that one you could probably put 5 in. It'd be delicious. And you know what? I'm going to put a couple more in the big apple because it just needs it. And so this is part of the fun of being in the kitchen. Once you get more confident in the kitchen, you can play with recipes. Now, of course, this is going to change the nutrition information. Yeah, it's going to put some more sugar back in there, but this is a big apple. So it needs to have that core filled up with caramels. Now, the last step before these go into the oven is to brush this mixture on top. And so I just have a little pastry brush here to make it easier, and I'm just going to brush this deliciousness. And the oven's preheated. I love it when timing works out like this. And making sure to get some down into that core as well that we hollowed out, because we want to get some of that buttery goodness down there. And once I have both of these covered, I'll go back and do extra, but for now I just want to make sure I have enough for both of the apples. If you don't have a pastry brush, I do recommend getting one. It makes tasks like this so much easier. And already this looks really good. And that looks like just the right amount, so that worked out very well. And I'll let you take a look at the smaller one. You can see it's nice and coated and ready to go in the oven. So away we go. And here is the finished product. If I were to do these again, I would choose smaller apples instead of the bigger ones. As you can see on this smaller one, it has more of that blooming effect that we're going for. I would also chop the caramels instead of putting them in whole, because they didn't melt as well as I had hoped. So second time around, smaller apples, chop the caramels, but otherwise these look amazing. I can't wait to try them.